So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hania Radziejowska, and it's a huge privilege and honor to moderate today evening. This event is co-produced and co-organized with our amazing friends Vice. And the title of our talk, The Empire Strikes Back, Soviet Legacy in Weaponized Memory. This title is, I think, very beautiful. Yes, and I would like to welcome our distinguished guests. First of all, this weekend, there probably most of you you had this possibility to visit the events organized by curators of Ukrainian Venice Pavilion, and I think today it will be very interesting opportunity to talk with Ksenia Małych, who is co-curator of the Ukrainian Pavilion Biennale Art 2026 in Venice. She is art historian, curator, and now program director of Lat Art Center in Ivano-Frankivsk. And yes, and Eugenia Moliar, who is art historian, research assistant at the Institute for Urban and Regional Planning, Department of Monument Conservation and Urban Cultural Heritage at the Technical University Berlin, and Victoria Feszak, who is representative of the Vice core member and interdisciplinary analyst and project manager. So the plan for today evening is that Victoria, then Eugenia, and then Ksenia will have short keynotes with some and not so short presentation, and then I have a hugely long list of questions, but you will also have a chance to have your own and ask our guests. And well, today, of course, we will discuss how Soviet monumental heritage functions in contemporary Europe, not as neutral remnants of the past, but as active elements shaping political narratives, collective memory, and international tensions. Our conversation, our talk, takes place in the shadow of Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine, which has profoundly transformed how Soviet monuments are perceived, from symbols of victory over German Nazi to signs of imperial domination and instruments of political influence. So we'll have chance to reflect on whether history, memory, and culture can be used as tools of symbolic control, and how we can respond to difficult heritage created under totalitarian regimes. So now, first, Victoria Feszak, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Victoria Feszak, core member of Vice, and I'm really happy to open this discussion today with our statement, with the keynote from my organization. When we speak of Soviet war memorials in Berlin, we should begin by asking a simple but uncomfortable question. What exactly is being preserved there? Is it mourning? Is it the memory of the dead? Or is it also a monumental language of domination that democratic Europe has never fully learned to challenge? These memorials are often defended as military cemeteries, and of course, the graves must be treated with dignity and protection. But the problem is that the graves are not what dominates the spaces. What dominates them is scale, hierarchy, and ideological direction. If you go to Treptow Park with someone who has never been there before and ask them what they see first, they will not tell you about graves. They will point to the giant soldier, the monumental axes, the choreography of stone, and the certainty of victory carved into space. What they often do not notice is that they are walking through a cemetery. They are not at the center. The center is occupied by Soviet power. This is the crucial contradiction. Memorials that are formally defended as site of mourning often function in practice as stages for imperial narration. That contradiction has become impossible to ignore since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. What had long been treated in Germany as an inherited, stable, almost untouchable memorial space has been reactivated as a contested political landscape. Russia did not invent the symbolic charge of these places. It inherited it, appropriated, and weaponized it. Today, Soviet war memorials no longer function only as remnants of a past regime. They have become part of a contemporary politics of intimidation, appropriation, and hybrid warfare. Russia's war against Ukraine has shown that empire does not only return through weapons, it also returns through symbols, commemorative rituals, spatial dominance, and through the ability to define what counts as anti-fascism, liberation, victory, and legitimate grief. Empire strikes back when it captures memory and occupies the present through the unresolved monuments of the past. Often, the real strike follows afterwards. And it does so not only because it is strong, but because we still allow it to behave as an empire. This is why Vice approaches these memorials not simply as historical sites, but as active political spaces. We deliberately chose not to legitimize them through any kind of visits. At the same time, we challenged restrictions imposed by the Berlin police on expression at these sites, namely, in 2023, we successfully took legal action against the ban on Ukrainian flags at the memorials. In Germany's memory of the Second World War, Ukraine rarely appears as a historical actor in its own right. Ukrainian experiences are often absorbed into the abstract category of the Soviet or framed only in relation to Russia. Instead of constantly trying to point out differences and thereby repeatedly recreating the colonial relation of Russia to Ukraine, our work focuses on foregrounding Ukrainian subjectivity. Our initiatives therefore seek to make visible the history of Ukrainian people and the history of what Timothy Snyder describes as the Bloodlands, where millions of civilians and soldiers lost their lives between two totalitarian regimes. For decades, Germany's relationship to Soviet war memorials was shaped by the Cold War memory framework in which responsibility meant continuity. To preserve the memorials, to maintain them, to keep the ritual order intact. But after 2022, it became impossible to ignore their political and propagandistic dimensions. Today, to preserve these memorials in exactly the same form, with the same symbolism, the same monumental emphasis, and sometimes even restored Stalin quotations funded by taxpayers, is not a neutral act. It is a decision to prolong a representational order that no longer corresponds either to historical complexity or to democratic values. Vice's interventions have emerged precisely from this tension. We asked, where in Berlin's commemorative landscape are the 10 million Ukrainians killed between 1939 and 1945 remembered? Where is the place for those whose suffering has been hidden inside Soviet abstraction and then appropriated by Russian state narrative? How can memory in Germany become more just, more plural, and more historically honest? What needs to change is not the dignity of the graves, but the hierarchy of meaning within these spaces. First, the graves themselves must become visible again. If these sites are protected as cemeteries, let us protect them, but not Stalin quotations. Then the work of memory must begin from the dead, not from the monumental script of state power. Visitors should not leave Treptower or Tiergarten remembering only the giant soldier and the rhetoric of victory. They should understand whose bodies lie there, from which republics, and under which historical conditions, and with what human cost. Second, these sites must be critically and visibly contextualized in ways that address not only the history of 1945, but also the afterlives of these monuments, their Stalinist aesthetics, their function within Soviet occupation, their role in Cold War memory politics, and their renewed mobilization by Russia today. Contextualization must not mean adding a small plaque outside the memorial site and declaring the problem solved. It means changing the interpretive center of the site. Third, the work with these memorials must include voices that were historically excluded from their narrative, including Ukrainians, but also other Eastern Europeans, descendants of those erased by Soviet homogenization, and civil society actors who approach memory through justice rather than imperial continuity. A post-colonial perspective is essential here. We cannot decolonize memory by continuing to invite only the same institutional actors who have long dominated discussions about the Soviet Union, often Russian or Russia-connected organizations, while Ukrainian voices remain marginal or are invited only as an appendix to Russian ones. This imbalance has often been justified by the assumption that these actors are more experienced or more knowledgeable. But decolonizing memory requires a shift in who is recognized as a legitimate voice in this debate. New perspectives are not decorative additions, they are structurally necessary. Fourth, these memorials should be approached as part of a broader process of transitional justice. Memory is not secondary to justice. The way a society remembers determines whose suffering is recognized, whose agency is affirmed, and whose losses remain politically invisible. If Russia uses Soviet victory mythology to legitimize present-day aggression, then rethinking Soviet memorials is not a marginal cultural debate. It reveals that post-war memory politics failed us all. It is part of Europe's struggle over democratic values, historical accountability, and the moral language through which violence is either normalized or resisted. This is why the binary between preservation and dismantling is not enough. What is needed is transformation, a serious practice of resignification. Not destruction for its own sake and not conservation for the sake of comfort, but a democratic reworking of these spaces so that they no longer serve as a frozen theaters of empire. If these memorials continue to stand in Berlin, they cannot remain untouched in meaning. They cannot continue to speak only in the language of Soviet triumph while being exploited by Russian imperial memory. They must be disarmed symbolically. They must be open to plural histories. They must stop functioning as monuments of domination disguised as cemeteries of mourning. Because the real question is not whether Europe can preserve the past. The question is whether Europe is ready to confront the colonial structure still hidden inside its memory culture, and whether it is ready and willing to change them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to welcome Eugenia. Here, you have here also the remote control. Yes. Yes. It works? Marku. Działa.
Dankeschön. Yeah, so I would like to talk today about the part of my research, part of my dissertation, which in my dissertation I'm working with this Soviet monumental heritage and the ways of it functions in contemporary politics of memory, and not only in the historical condition in which these monuments were created, but also in how they continue to act in the present. So Soviet monuments were never simply decorative or commemorative elements of public space. They were designed as ideological instruments. Through monuments, mosaics, and memorial complexes, the Soviet state constructed a visual order that shaped collective memory and the historical imagination. These objects helped to produce specific narratives about heroism, sacrifice, and victory. In this way, visual culture played an important role of informing political identities. Today, these monuments have become a part of new political conflicts, especially after the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine. So what for a long time perceived to be perceived as a neutral historical background has suddenly become a highly politicized field. So in my research, I analyzed how Soviet visual heritage interpreted today. And I defined these three main interpretative regimes: aestheticization, securitization, and problematization. The aestheticization refers to an approach that interpreted Soviet objects primarily as artwork, focusing on their formal or stylistic qualities and completely ignoring their ideological context. It's mostly about the phenomenon of Soviet Ukrainian mosaics, which popularized just as an artwork, but not even ignoring, but it's sometimes hiding their ideological context. Securitization is described situation in which these objects are perceived as a political threat and therefore become targets of removal. And problematization, which is the approach that interests me most. This threads these monuments as a historical material that allows us to critically analyze the relationship between images, power, and collective memory. So now I will focus on the Soviet memorials, so the second regime, and actually the Soviet memorials in Berlin. It's very specific because it's among the earliest post-war monuments created after the Second World War, because they were built in the 1940s. Even before the formation of the later official Soviet canon of Great Victory. And actually, before the 19th, in this important, because the monumental, this cult of the Great Patriotic War was institutionalized much later, in the 1960s. And in the early post-war years, commemorative practices were still very rare, especially in the territory of Soviet Union. So these large-scale memorial complexes were first constructed in Europe, and the Soviet Union built monumental memorial assembled across the Eastern Europe, a past of post-war political presence, and of course as threats. At the same time, within the territory of USSR itself, commemorative architecture remained much more modest. Most wartime burial sites were marked by simple and laconic obelisk, and there was one remarkable yearly monument established in 1946 in Chernivtsi. It's probably because Chernivtsi, they are not perceived as a part of Soviet Union, but as a Europe. I don't know why. And it was very nice monument created by Ukrainian sculptor Halina Petrashevich, which was dismantled a few years ago, unfortunately. And this monument represents one of the earliest attempts to create a monumental form of post-war commemoration within the Soviet territory. Returning to Berlin, these memorials should be understood not only as monuments of remembrance, but also as early experiments in shaping the visual language of Soviet war commemoration. And actually the both monuments, biggest monuments in Treptower Park and in the Tiergarten, they were created by Ukrainian Soviet sculptors, authors. Lev Kerbel, he's originally from Chernihiv region, and Yevhen Vuchetich from Dnipro. And yeah, so they emerged at a moment when the symbolic meaning of the war had not yet been fully fixed, and it's one of the very important historical shift occurred in the Soviet interpretation of war. In the early Soviet ideological framework, political imagination was oriented primarily toward the future. Like a Marxist ideology projected a vision of the communism as a historical horizon that society was moving forward. However, by the 60s, this orientation began to change. Instead of focusing on the utopian future, Soviet ideology increasingly turned toward the past. It's one of the hypotheses because of the lack of the personalities. After the Lenin and Stalin, they were not able to find the figure to put it in the center of their ideological canon. So that's why they decided to put the dead soldiers in this ideological construction. And so victory in the war was transformed into a foundational myth that no longer required proof, or it's not allowed any critical discussion because of the sacrifice this dead Soviet soldiers. And yeah, so in this ideological configuration, actually the dead soldiers became the key elements of historical meanings. And yeah, another moment. Yeah, and this maybe it's not. I would like to show this artwork by Alina Yakubenko, and this. And before, I have to say that this. Today the meanings of these monuments changing significantly, because in the context of Russian war against Ukraine, Soviet war imagery increasingly overlaps with contemporary political realities, and the figure of the Soviet soldiers is not longer perceived only as historical symbol of the Second World War, but more often associated with the contemporary Russian soldiers, and also this These narratives, it's very intensively shared by Kremlin propaganda. This shift also demonstrates how monuments can acquire the new meanings in changing geopolitical context. And about this example of Alina Yakubenko artwork, and this image, we can see a Ukrainian soldier standing near the monument of Motherland, the Museum of the Second World War in Kyiv, one of the most recognizable Soviet monumental symbol in Kyiv. And the images create a clear tension between two visual regimes. So on the one hand, the monumental figure of Motherland represents the Soviet heroic canon, and the language of the victory, strength, and monumental glory. And on the other hand, the contemporary soldier introduced the reality of the ongoing war. And especially, as for me, this series of artwork by Alina Yakubenko started in 2015, and till it's ongoing till now, explores how the visual representation of war changing today. Historically, images of war were strongly controlled. Access to the battlefield was limited, and images circulated through institutional channels such as official press pools, and war images often functioned as an illustration of an official narrative. In the contemporary war, this system has totally collapsed because the social media, smartphones, and messaging from platforms allows images circulate totally uncontrollably. So instead of a single official narrative, we encounter the overwhelming stream of fragmented and often disturbing images. And in this Alina Yakubenko's work, she depicted the soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers. She captured these images in the social media and the Telegram channels, and rather than reproducing the heroic imagery, she focused on the figures that are usually excluded from the official narrative, like deserters, prisoners of war, looters, or soldiers in a moment of vulnerability. And her approach somehow echoes the Francisco Goya's famous series, The Disaster of War, which was one of the first attempts to represent war not as a heroic narrative, but as an experience of violence and moral collapse. So this example also points to a broader theoretical problem. Images and symbols cannot simply be neutralized by removing them from physical space, because demolition does not necessarily eliminate their meanings. So images often continue to exist in public memory, in media circulation, and in political discourse, and conflicts around monuments are not only conflicts about the physical objects, and the images which have a particular kind of their own agency. And also for me one very important point to be discussed in this situation with the monuments is it would be discussed that the Today, the Soviet heritage, often interpreted as a Soviet, means Russian, but it's very wrong stereotype, because the Soviet Union was a multinational political system, and that's cultural production, including a monumental art, was created by artists from many different republics and cultural traditions and regional art schools, and the memorial themselves were built across the territories that today belong to many independent states. So for this reason, Soviet heritage cannot be understood as exclusively Russian, And so from this perspective, the decolonization of the Soviet heritage should not mean simply the destruction, but decolonization should involve reappropriation and deconstruction of this monstrous narrative of the terrible, horrible Sovietness. To deconstruct is for the many different Sovietness, Ukrainian Soviet heritage, Latvian Soviet heritage, and Kazakh Soviet heritage, and that's why it would be more complicated to manipulate by this this phenomenon from the Russian side, from the side of the nowadays nowadays Kremlin propaganda. And yeah, and also a few artworks I would like to show. That it's as for me, it's one of the good example of the reconceptualization of this Soviet monuments. It was done in 2022 by the group L'Urine Rouge in Kiev, in one of this sleeping district in Troyeshina, and yeah, so it was not so like visible, because of course it was like dismantled, this huge condom on the obelisk, but like we have this documentation and their amazing text actually, which really shows us a very deep understanding of this of the propagandistic concept of the Second World War, which was developed in the Soviet time. And yeah, and another example with like a also, as for me, this irony and humor, it's very effective instrument to desacralize something, to reconceptualize. And this project, it's a project by the art group. It was started in 2015, named Hero Heroes, so the collection of the photography of the monuments, but with the very particular attention to their representing of their bodies, and it's like the sexualized images, and yeah, so it's also like a ironic and humoristic project, but as for me it's very important for rethinking this phenomenon, and also unfortunately after this very intensive wave of the dismantling monuments, which was appeared, it was the first wave of decommunization since 2015, but the first edition of the decommunization law, it wasn't included the monuments dedicated to Second World War, but after 2022 it was changed, and now it's officially possible to dismantle, and unfortunately, it's not just dismantled, but very brutally vandalized. So this project and this documentation, it's a very important archive. You can find this page in this public in Instagram, Hero Heroes. Yeah, thank you for your attention.
Я хочу стоять.
А, да? No. Okay.
О. Ой. Thank you, Zhenya. So I'm also art historian, and I also work a lot with the topic of with the contemporary art that works with memory, with heritage, and like made a lot of curatorial works and exhibitions about that. But and there are a lot of very interesting and fruitful cases. It's because of mentioned by Zhenya the law of decommunization that raised after Maidan, after Revolution of Dignity, and it was a reaction of contemporary artists of Ukraine, of Ukrainian cultural community, because immediately we understood that we're gonna lose a big part of our cultural heritage without any rethinking of that. So it was not a fun club of Soviet art. It was just a fear that we will lose something without any thinking about that, without any position about that. But today I'm going to tell you about one case, and I think this case is brilliant, and now it's very relevant. So now you can see here on the screen a photograph. It's a photograph from museum from 80s. It's aircraft Su-7 in Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is the eastern part of Ukraine, Donetsk Oblast. And this aircraft was like a keeper of nuclear weapon in Soviet times. But it was a tradition to install Soviet aircrafts or aerojets in the parks. It was like very wide tradition. For example, my generations, we grew up in the parks where over our heads of playing children, there could be a big Soviet militarian aerojet. So it was okay. We never really, I think, we never think about that, why it's here. But this, of course, was a part of a narrative of, and it began in the times of Cold War. It was about symbol of military power of the Soviet Union. And sometimes, and they position it as a monument. It was like monument dedicated to the pilots did defending a city. In Russian, it's called Вечный подвиг пилотов. But usually, very often, these air jets never took part in Second World War. It was, for example, jets that were produced in 50s or after. And this airjet particularly. So they installed it in 1978, dedicated to podvig. But I think, and I have a theory, that it was a very practical solution, because to dispose these airjets was really not comfortable and not cheap. So it was, I think it was a solution, a very managerial and very practical. So it was standing in the park, and in 2005, they dismantled this aircraft. But please don't think that just it was about local authorities of Pokrovsk that were thinking about ideology, about Soviet symbols. It just was absolutely ruined. That's why they dismantled this aircraft in 2005. And then after the war began, our state were starting to think more about these eastern regions of Ukraine. That they worked a lot with Mariupol. They worked a lot with cities that were closer to a front line, and they decided to invest to Pokrovsk. And this is a park that's called Yubileyny, so dedicated to anniversary of something very Soviet, I don't remember, something like Komsomol something, gathering, so absolutely not informative. And they decided to make this park, and then in 2018 they began a reconstruction of this park, so they decided they even wanted to rename it after Leontovich, and they also put there a sculpture dedicated to Leontovich. Unfortunately, it was not manageable to take it away. So, and they decided, we have this pedestal without aircraft because it was ruined, and it's very expensive to dismantle this pedestal because it was tons of concrete. And they decided that it's a very good idea to invite some contemporary artist and to put something beautiful. And this is very important because the task was to create something beautiful. And Jana created something beautiful there. And this is, I think that this is an amazing task for artists, that you have a place where before was placed Soviet keeper of nuclear weapons, and please put something else there. I think it's an amazing task. So Jana was thinking that she needs to create something beautiful and something opposite to airjet. And Jana just referred to tradition of European park sculpture, something simple. It was idea to make something simple, something peaceful, something about admiring nature. She was imagining children, making photos, and everything was like that. So now, during this tour of this object all over Ukraine and also European Union cities, we were meeting people from Pokrovsk who was showing their photos from Prompt, or just, it was a meeting point, like, let's meet near the deer. It became really a social spot for Pokrovsk. And this is really what I really like in Jana's practice, that she always keeps this layer, like a very, very simple and very beautiful layer just for everyone. So with Denis Ruban, her partner, they were creating this concrete deer for 2 months there on the place. So it was created for constant view. It was not a temporary sculpture that was placed, and you can see that they changed the pedestal because it was like this. They changed it, make it more nice. And then in 2024, when Frontline, it's very important. In 2019, the Frontline was 30 kilometers from. So it was not very far. 30 kilometers, it's also not very far. And then in 2024, the front line was closer and closer, and evacuation of civilians began there in Pokrovsk, especially families with children. And due to we don't have a very effective state system of evacuation of heritage, Jeanne and her friends, they decided to save this sculpture. But this sculpture belongs to Pokrovsk Historical Museum, and they asked if they can take it and evacuate. First, they, of course, asked if they are planning to evacuate. Of course, museum didn't plan to evacuate it, so they just hired this beautiful masculine Pokrovsk guys, and they helped them to dismantle the sculpture that should be there forever. And they dismantled it and evacuated it to Vinnytsia, more like, as we say, semi-safe region. And then after that, there were open competition for a national project in Venice, and we just decided that this is a beautiful metaphor, because it's not just a deer. You can see that Jana refers also to origami technique. So this is also a very simple but very deep symbol of this combination of something fragile, something light, like a paper and a paper figure, and also concrete. So this was like that. And then when we were thinking about if to apply this project, how can it relate to the historical situation where we are living? And this was about the main topic, as I think it still is, it's about security guarantees. How we can talk about that right now, how can we trust some security guarantees. And this symbol and this image of just a paper, it came up. And also this year, 2026, it's 30 years after Ukraine was given away all nuclear weapons that we had. And we were on the 3rd place of the world's nuclear arsenal. And we gave it up. And what is really important, it was totally supported by Ukrainian people. It was not just a decision of some president or other guys. And because it was like, I dived into these documents about that, and we even use in our official communication some references to design of this document, but we didn't really have a chance to keep it. But it was, and this document shows that we gave it up as a subjective country, as a subjective state. We were not giving it back to Russia. We were giving it. It was our decision to go another way. So we're gonna show this sculpture in Venice, and now it's on its way. So you can see here it was in Ukraine. And then it stood in the line to cross the border, you can see.
With the line.
Yes, because deer needs to be beautiful. And it stood in the line to Poland to cross the border there. And there were a beautiful exhibition in Białystok in Arsenal Gallery with Monika Shevchik. And then it moved here. It was first city, it was Warsaw, then Prague, then Vienna, then Berlin, and now the deer is on the way to Brussels, to European Parliament, to show up there. Just a little reminder, just a little talk about security guarantees. And of course, we're gonna show in Venice not only the sculpture, but we're very proud that it's gonna be in the public space on the bank of Laguna, near the entrance of Giardini. And also we will show a big video, a multi-channel video installation with all this way. We call it from Pokrovsk to Venice. So this is this deer is having now, I think, very much fun. Seeing a lot of people, and in every city we meet people from Pokrovsk who has very warm memories about this sculpture. And every time when we have some party near this deer, Zhanna is talking that we are celebrating that we saved it. That of course, when we talk about that in Ukraine, we are much more critical about how we save our cultural heritage, but it's our problem, we will manage. So I think that's all for intro.
Thank you very much for this very multi-perspective inputs I mean, both of you. And now there is this chance to a little bit go deeper to this issue. And of course, if anyone would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise the hand and to, I mean, already. Yes, I mean, because if you want, please.
I just have a question on this practice to make this dear traveling also on base of what Shenya Moya said about this past, present, future concepts of how to treat Soviet heritage. Well, this is not Soviet heritage, but just the idea, because there are so many examples of translocated Soviet heritage pieces, I know, that I don't know where in this idea this is interlinked or interwoven. Yeah, so.
I think that this is not. No? This project is not about preserving Soviet heritage, just to be clear. This sculpture replaced a Soviet heritage, or I don't know, is it heritage, this jet? Okay, so this is example of how contemporary artists can rethink some place of Soviet heritage or something like that. If you dive more into Zhana Kadyrova's practice, and please visit her website, and you will see that she really made brilliant works on rethinking Soviet heritage, ironically rethinking, and this was really brilliant. And she, for example, made 6 meters huge mosaic works that called monumental propaganda. So she was very ironically rethinking Soviet cultural, artistic heritage, and I really think that it has a very important place in the history of Ukrainian art. So this is this deer is of course not. It's officially, according to law, it's even not a heritage. It's just a contemporary art piece, and this is also problematic because it touches the problem of how to evacuate, how to save monumental art of any period of time during the war. And another question is how to quickly get regulations for saving contemporary art pieces that we already have. Of course, we don't really, we are not good at the moment for managing our even museum collections, because it's really not easy and bureaucratically wise too. But in the question of saving contemporary arts, it's always now responsibility and solutions of private institutions, private collectors, just activists. So we don't have for the moment a good working managerial approach from our state. And this is reality.
But perhaps if I can add here a question, because of course, perhaps the Soviet jet is not the heritage of Soviet monuments. Perhaps our expert will explain it later. But I think this whole idea, and because of the war, of course, this is the main reason, and then this whole construction and art idea, curatorial idea, it's revealing step by step what is behind of these Soviet Russian monuments around everywhere, because the jets I also remember, and tanks, of course, in Poland, they were everywhere. I mean, our region is covered by this, was covered, and still in many places is covered. And I want to ask here, because this project, okay, it's the traveling, the deer is traveling as a refugee. But in Venice, there is also this huge discussion about that Russian pavilion is back. And I think it's the part of this social engineering, how the Russia, Soviet Union was trying to build this pressure by culture, by monuments, by presence on different levels. Can you comment it, and can you tell it, and perhaps?
I think that the presence of Russian artists and Russian project now in Venice, we really were trying to understand it, and as I understood all these messages, it's absolutely this is a prolongation of tradition of Soviet monuments, absolutely, because it's such a high level of hypocrisy there, and this is the same when you. This is the same lie, because when you are showing the airjet produced in 50s and name this monument of a heroical deed by pilots, so you lie to your people just easily, and it's just a tradition. And this and it keeps, because if you don't know, I will present you a Russian project in Venice. They announced the project of some musicians, blah blah blah, tree with roots in the sky, okay, but their main statement is that they are not coming back, that they were always there. First, very important thing, and second, that art is beyond politics. And I think this is really wow, because everything what they did since Soviet times and now, it's just using art as a politics tool, as instrumentalizing of art as weapon in hybrid informational war. So this is really. And of course we can talk about participants, those who connected directly to Russian state, but this is also, but it's question about law and about sanctions. But we are, as art historians, trying to analyze it, but it doesn't take a long time because everything is on the surface. So I think it's absolutely, it has absolutely direct line from this symbol to what they're gonna present in Venice.
And Eugenia, I was very impressed by your presentation and this absolutely very fresh discovering how this monuments are working and can work, and how we now can discover that. And in reference to what Victoria was reading as a statement of Vice and their work on these monuments, so I mean, there were very concrete proposals in the end. And do you think that there is a limit to reinterpreting monuments? I mean, so can all monuments be given new meanings, or do some always keep their original political message? It's very important if we want to work with them. And the second, perhaps it's also, I mean, connected, yes, that are monument debates really about who has the power to control historical memory and national identity?
Yeah, thank you for your question. And regarding this airjet, I will answer. Then we can actually define our perception of heritage, and we can establish this understanding of the heritage or not heritage. But for example, we can imagine that the Soviets their approach to this modern ideas of contemporary art, and they installed this ready-made in the park as a very contemporary view of art. So yeah, it's quite flexible. And also about the reinterpretation, it should be actually it should be done from the different perspective. It's not only about the artistic reinterpretation, but also it's about scientists, researchers, and scientists' works, because of the as I know in Berlin it's about 22,000 of the buried places, and not much than 40% of the dead soldiers, they were identified. So it's like, but it's, of course, it's possible to do. It's not really easy, but it's possible to do it. It's also, it's a very important and let's say necessary way to represent this not as a Soviet, but of this multinational this Soviet army, and even in the monuments, when they listed the names, it's now it's mentioned, not any nationality mentioned, but it's recognizable. You can recognize the Georgian names, Ukrainian names, and Baltic names. So because of this specific surnames, and this way it should be combined with the artistic approach. And I know then at the beginning of full-scale invasion, one artist from Venezuela, he proposed to temporary installation to cover this monument in the Tiergarten by this sands, like it was in Ukraine. The activists, they started to protect the monuments in the city center, and they used these bags with sand, and also it was, as for me, also very very good idea as, like I said, artistic gesture and artistic proposal. But unfortunately, the city has rejected this proposal, and it wasn't done. But maybe somehow he will manage to do it.
I will remind perhaps our project with Vice. Together we made in 2022 in May. I will give one second. We were. It was time when Kharkiv was very shelled, and these tanks, as originally produced in Kharkiv, the idea was to make it as a very clear message to politicians. Ukraine needs tanks, and we were making the movie about that we are taking these tanks and sending to Ukraine. And we made it with the movie, and I love this story, how we were shooting. We registered as a demonstration very early in the morning, and what was the most fascinating, that one of the a young German guy came at this, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and we were standing, and the police was so furious that we cheated, yes, because we made demonstration and he was shooting, it was movie plan. But this guy came and he said, oh, I want to take part in this demonstration and demonstrate. So we were demonstrating, and he had a speech even. I'm sorry, so it's here the next.
Thank you. I want to refer to the monuments in Berlin, and it was also, I think knowledge is key. Maybe it's naive to think, but what if you display so nobody cannot see it, that the authors of these monuments are Ukrainians? Would that spoil the Russian party there? Like, I mean, every year they gather and they have these crazy propaganda rallies. So how about displaying its Ukrainian authorship?
Actually, it's it should be done, of course, but first of all, the Ukraine should recognize these authors as Ukrainians, because in Ukraine, unfortunately, it was after the full-scale invasion, it was this movement, activistic movement, to re-identify artists which were represented as a Russian artist, but they were born in Ukraine. Malevich, so the most most significant example, and other artists, but from the period of Russian Empire, but no one in Ukraine unfortunately, to re-identify the Soviet Ukrainian authors. So Ukrainians are ready to get rid of this this part of art history, and so so first it should be done in Ukraine to start to recognize, because this history of art is our history. It's not just Soviet, but it's Ukrainian Soviet.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but I also think that here in Germany you have in Berlin this agreement, the treaty, for which
2+4.
correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, for the Berliner monuments, there is an agreement that was between Soviet Union and Germany.
2+4.
Yeah, and then it covers everything. You need to have the authorization by Russia as the heritage from the Soviet Union. Now is Russia co-responsible for these monuments. So whenever you want to add a tafel, something, a name, you need to agree with them. And this is part of the problem.
But then art comes into play, and then you put the display somewhere nearby.
So let's collect the other questions.
I don't have a question, actually. I have a very short commentary. When you, Ksenia, were talking about this aircraft, you said, oh, this is so absurd that they referred to it as a heroic deed or something. But actually, it's absurd in a different way, because, well, you know, the mortality among Soviet test pilots was incredible. Even Yuri Gagarin, you know, died in a test flight. He crashed. And so the idea was that fighter pilots were actually heroes in the state of a permanent, you know, heroic sacrifice. And one thing comes on top, and that is, it was a common explanation by single mothers, where the absent father is, oh, he was a test pilot, he crashed. and this omnipresent aircraft was a kind of reminder, legitimization for broken families.
Any questions? Perhaps someone would like to add something.
Normally we are talking here a lot about Berlin and the Treptower Park, but if you just go around everywhere in the Eastern German federal states, it's like Soviet cemeteries like everywhere, and especially in this Brandenburg area. And I live myself in Frankfurt-Oder, and we have like huge Soviet monument there, like ridiculous huge. And also the grave plates with even the names on it there. So, for example, the Georgians you can easily spot there. But I'm wondering, like, because there's so much attention here on Berlin and on this focus about the relations, but you can see the Russian ambassador, for example, always goes now to Brandenburg or went last year to Torgau, because there was a lot of this 80 years memorial service. I myself was in Zelo, and it was just ridiculous what was going on there. And I don't know how you can handle this, because all this focus is just on Berlin always, but I mean, just go to every small town, like, how can you, I don't know, do something with those monuments or those cemeteries?
Yeah, it's actually the Berlin. It would be like the example, like to propose some approach how we can deal with these monuments and with all these sites. And also in the museum of Karl Horst and the Soviet German museum, and actually, if the very pay attention to all this in installation inside. It's everywhere. It's mentioned then which national Soviet armies were in Berlin, and depicted like the Lviv front, Kiev front, Belarusian front, and so it's like it's already present. So it's need to be just highlighted, nothing to change significantly, just to highlight.
But for example, in Torgau, it's even written on the GDR monument that it was the Ukrainian Soviet army, but still, like, the Russian ambassador scoops it as this.
Yeah, actually, this bureaucratic trick with this Russia, so everything which should be accepted by Russia, it's quite a big problem, of course, for all this reinterpretation. But that's why, it's always possible to do something not so really noticeable, but meaningful.
Some meters away.
Last year, regarding the question, regarding a question about the Soviet, or your remarks about Soviet monuments in East Germany. Last year there was a remarkable opinion piece by Sabine Renefans in Der Spiegel. It's a well-known East German op-ed writer who was actually actively defending the presence of the Soviet ambassador at Zöllhofer Hills, and she argued that it is very important, to include them in these commemorative practices somehow, because this is shared Russian East German heritage, this commemoration, and this is actually a very revealing episode of how these memorials continue to influence political discourse in East Germany. Actually, we have different political landscapes in East and West Germany, and this is one of the factors, obviously.
Add something. Actually, I see really a huge contradiction in our discussion. From one side, we had this Soviet heritage, but we don't want to have it fully. We want to choose parts of it and to be responsible for something and not to be responsible for other things. So the question is, all these dead people, are they ours, or just because we don't want to correspond with these monuments, we give these dead people and we give them for misuse to Russia? And it's exactly what happens in East Germany. So is it our heritage? Are we also Soviet? Are we also responsible that our artists built these monuments? Are they Soviet or not? Or in the moment, then Ukrainian artists became Soviet, they are not Ukrainian anymore? Are we part of Soviet history with whole responsibility? Or we only victims? So if we are not answering these questions, we are not moving further on. And it's something I hear also today, because we are like, yes, it's our history, it's not our history. We are decolonizing ourselves, or, okay, I am from an older generation and I know how huge and how representative was Ukrainian Communist Party and all these careers. And now we are, when we are talking about, war, which takes place now, it's not a legitimization of, I don't know, our participant in this ideology. So how we are dealing with all this now? I'm more wondering than saying something.
About how we're dealing about that. I think now it's not the best time, of course, to deal with that. And we should have been started, or maybe you should have been started it before. Yeah, if we're talking about generation, I understand about that, because it was never comfortable. And it's not comfortable now, of course. Now it's even less comfortable because it's very sensitive now.
I'm asking this just because we don't know what to do with this monument.
No, I understand, and I'm thinking how we could make it in another way. And that's why I was thinking that basically it started, all this rethinking of Soviet heritage in our culture, it started with the war from 2014. It never started on any level, like, not on the, I'm not talking about cultural policy even, I'm talking about levels of artistic thinking, and Zhenya confirms. Yeah, but it's really began with the war in 2014. And of course, we had this time to rethink a little bit, to try to push our authorities to have some solutions. But all this time, there were a war. And that's why it's a little bit, I think that we didn't finish, of course, all this rethink. Because even now, I'm now looking on the tab on this Soviet Serp Molot, and this is exotic for me because most of the time I spend in Ukraine and I can't see it anywhere anymore. And this is nice. But it's really something exotic. Yeah, it's very exotic. So I think that we absolutely, in Ukrainian society, in cultural community, we never finished to rethink, to accept our Ukrainian Soviet past, even in terms of culture, let's say. I'm trying to stand on my land of expertise. But we will not finish it now.
But isn't this a little bit more complicated? I mean, I understand from this Polish perspective that it's this decolonizing Soviet heritage in this way, to show that Soviet Union and Russia really appropriate everything as what it was Soviet. Even this, what you have mentioned about this 4+2, it's a typical situation. Everything what was Soviet was taken by Russia after 91. But in the end, when we say after Karl Jaspers or Hannah Arendt, we cannot say about political responsibility by Ukrainian Soviet artists or communists or anyone, because it was the violence. How they were not deciding, voting for being in Soviet Union. So, I mean, I understand that the stories, I mean, there is a, I mean, no, I didn't.
Well, I mean, there was always a place for protest.
No, there is always this individual.
Artists.
No, I didn't mean.
It's
I didn't.
Another discussion.
I did no, because it's this just a commentary. I wanted to make distinction between, of course, private and individual responsibility, and this is the biographies of concrete people. But I think it's perhaps taking too much on yourself when you say that we as Ukrainians, we are taking responsibility for the whole Soviet system. And here I'm jumping to what you were mentioning about 2014 as a beginning of discovery or revealing what these monuments mean. I mean, because we sometimes underestimate, I think, this Soviet heritage. We underestimate the communists, these old monuments, jets, or everything, as what you were showing, like decor, like historical, I don't know, this memory about Second World War, okay, it's in this Soviet style, but we see that it's always on from different angles. I don't know, it's always the same about social engineering, of having this feeling of possessing, of domination over other nations. And I think perhaps this is a question when we discuss about even this different layers, very interesting, yes, these Ukrainian artists who were designing these Soviet monuments and so on, different stories. But today, when we understand that these monuments are part of this domination, is dismantling in ideas, these whole stories and this, even not physically, but intellectually, dismantling these monuments. Should it be with the Western also intellectuals? Because I think it's also the problem that we talk about understanding that this war, that we need to do something with that, but even this example with Venice, we see that there is also responsibility and need of joining into this process of what we call Western, I don't know, academia, artists, and that we really understand we are on the same page. It was question and not question. I hope you catch that there was a question I am inviting to answer.
Again, I have to repeat myself because it's first it should be done in Ukraine, because now we face some conflict. The different, very different attitudes towards the Soviet and the imperial time heritage. So in Ukraine, it's prohibited. Ukrainians are ready to get rid of all of these heritages. But at the same time, we trying to defend the building of Russian pavilion in Venice, because of it was built in Russian Empire, and the money for this provided by Ukrainian mecenat Khanenko, and it was built by Moldavian architect. So that's why it's a question. Like we are trying to defend this heritage as imperial heritage and Soviet heritage as our also, or we would like to get rid and extend this decommunization law. It should be extended every few years. So it's since 2015 it was just a decommunization. In 2023 it was extended a new edition named Anti-Pushkin. It includes this imperialistic heritage, and now it's everything is prohibited in Ukraine. But okay, let's how we can pretend to do something with this building of a Russian pavilion in Venice Biennial. So it's like
So, due to our law, we can take it and then destroy? Brilliant.
But this pavilion?
Yeah, we're talking about pavilion in Venice. You know, this green, beautiful house.
Just take it away from Russia. Oh, I see here two questions. Sorry,
I have my own mic.
But first.
Yeah, at first, thank you very much for the very interesting words. My English is not perfect. I hope you will understand me. I was born in Berlin, in East Berlin, 55 years ago. So you can count about my first 20 years. I lived behind the wall in a public cage. So I'm calling it now. And since 3 years, I'm with Memorial Deutschland, active at the Treptow Memorial, and we are making over there, or we're inviting Berlin and tourist people for critical guided tours over this area. And that's why it's very interesting for me today to listen the Ukraine view. I like to add to this young woman, she is probably younger than me in the age, to the topic 4+2 Verhandlungen, 4+2 contracts between Germany and the Soviet Union. This is for me too less intellectual bravery. Alexandra Matvichuk, Cafe Kiev. She forderte, she demanded from us. I was hearing her like a German audience. She was demanded from us intellectual bravery. And when we Germans, I can only speak for the Germans, when we are always sitting and weeping, we can do nothing because of the 4+2 Verhandlung, I get rid of this. I get rid of this. And I started, I'm not a jurist, I'm coming from the marketing, and right now I'm sogar a housewife only. I'm sitting 5 years at home. I'm very stupid, but I started to collect all the official contracts who are belonging to Treptow and Co., and I started to read them. And when you look into these contracts, of course, there is protection of the graveyard in it. And there is, how to say it, wir sollen sie ehren, diese Areale. But there is not written in detail, we cannot change it. I demand from you, from all of us, intellectual bravery. You are artist, you are historical, no? You are working on historical artist. I'm only a marketing woman. It means I'm demanding from you and from the young generation, think forward and don't tie your hands up for, the 4+2 contracts. We can do very much, but, and now I'm demanding from you, Wice, we must do it together. For instance, my Verein, Memorial Deutschland, we are always read it, I'm feeling so, as if we are a Soviet community. No, we are Germans. And we are also suffered, I'm in the East Germany, from this Soviet, I'm losing the words, you understand me. And that's why it is not good when we have thousands of this Veranstaltungen and we are doing nothing together. We must do it together. Maybe we have discussions, also inside my community we have discussions, we not always have the same opinion, but this is democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hanya, I just have a call for action to your comment, also for the intellectual bravery. Wice is about to launch a petition soon to recontextualize the memorial sites. So everyone who is now sitting in this audience will have a possibility to sign this petition so it can be brought to a higher level for the reconsidering of this memorial sites. So it's now your time. Now we discussed, we see the problem, now it's your time to sign the petition and contribute to this cause. Thank you.
And Ksenia wants to dismantle pavilion in Venice, Russian pavilion, so it's also...
Why not?
And Marek would like to, I think...
Yeah, I wanted to... I was just thinking, like, maybe we should ask the pros in this country, how did they deal with their own totalitarian system symbols? I don't think there are Nazi symbols on German soldiers' graves. So maybe you can remove the other totalitarian symbols from other soldiers' graves? And since you said that you have some part in Soviet system, like Ukraine, you could ask Germans how they did remove all these symbols of their own totalitarian system, and then maybe you could refer to them that it is possible to leave the buildings that were built in this time and just remove the symbols and the scripture of, I don't know, totalitarian dictators.
No, of course, in Western Europe is always this problem of lack of experience what Soviet communism, totalitarianism was. And of course, we always remember that Holocaust was something exceptional and unique. And that's why this is, in Poland especially, when we talk about, we don't want to say that everything is the same. It was not the same, but the totalitarian systems are in different methods and way, they are the same, but different. Yes, this is what we deal also, especially here in Berlin and in Germany, to explain that yes, the Soviet monuments are a huge threat. I see the question. I would like to add one story from Polish history. So you probably recognize this Palace of Science and Culture in Warsaw, this huge one, which was built as a Stalin gift to Warsaw. And the story is that after the Second War, the democratic underground and home army and people who were fighting for democratic Poland, they were, of course, by communists taken to the jail. Among them, for example, Władysław Bartoszewski, who is so important for our Polish-German relationship. And they were taken to prison, this Stalinistic prison, for 8-10 years, yes. And Władysław Bartoszewski, when he was released in 1954, I think, so after Stalin's death, or 55, and he went out and he saw this huge, horrible, Stalin palace. For him, it was clear message, yes? It was dominance message. It was clear that you will never be free. It was about that. Now, of course, this is a very interesting story how in Warsaw we treat this place, this building, as a part of our Warsaw landscape. But so many things had to be done and, changing the meaning. But still, I think it's super difficult to liberate even this space around in the center of Warsaw that it's again democratic because it was so built, and this intellectual construction which is behind this building, even it makes this space around as a something is not working. Okay, I will give the mic. Someone wanted to ask. I'm sorry. I saw. Yes.
I have a question for you, Pani Hanna, and the panel, because I think we talked a lot about artwork in connection with cemeteries, with graveyards, but I think there's enough art, and that's a German problem. There's still enough fascist art in the public space, especially in West Germany, that's not within context, just sitting there. So there's enough to do for the Germans still. But I was wondering what your opinion is on the destruction or removal of these places, because we talked a lot about leaving them and then decontextualizing them or doing something with them ironically. But what about removing them, putting them in storage somewhere or creating a museum? I'm often in the city of Olsztyn in the north of Poland, and there is a memorial for the Red Army, but it was done by a very renowned Polish sculptor named Ksawery Dunikowski. And there was a suggestion now to use, instead of removing it, to start a museum building around that particular monument. So what would be your opinion? Leave these things in situ so that it's in the public space so people can engage with it, or maybe put it in storage and then create a museum around them, or put them somewhere and not build a museum around them?
Of course, I will tell something obvious. We need to have a discussion about that. Yeah, but we know, I think, all these approaches, how to make it right. And we have, since 2014 in Ukraine, we have this discussion. Like all those, those who... Sorry, it's a bad word. So as for me, before 2014, I was never a fan of Soviet art. Yeah, I think it's obvious. But when you lose something, especially without any rethinking, you start to revalue these things. And of course, this discussion was from let's destroy everything to let's make a museum. Like I think in every post-Soviet country was or should be something like that. And as I said before, I think now it's a really complicated time to talk about that because it's very sensitive. And now in our streets of Ukrainian cities, we have a lot of emerging new war monuments now. And this is another problem because it's a question about how to find a proper language, proper visual language for that. And so when it's a question, when, for example, in all cities of Ukraine, there are alley with big portraits printed on acrylic with killed and died soldiers, and it grows every day. And just imagine this picture. In one day, this line of portraits meets Soviet monument. And their discussion just stopped being possible. Because there are people, mothers grieving, and Soviet monuments. And in this moment, you just stop being art historian, trying to fight for rethinking or something. You just stop. Because when it's living grief, it's just near you. All this rethinking, all these strategies, all this discussion, they just stop working.
But actually, I would like to add that this wave of destruction, Soviet war monuments in Ukraine, and especially it was very intensive in the central part of Ukraine and western part of Ukraine. And it was like quite a brutal and vandalized actions, and all of these actions under the slogan "Get out Russian soldiers from Ukraine," so they're like named them as Russian soldiers, even despite the fact that every monument had a list of locals who were killed during the Second World War. It's Ukrainians who were lived in these villages, so now their relatives still living there, but they were renamed as the Russians, and the monuments were destroyed. And it's very this paradox of Ukrainian decommunization, because the main narrative of Kremlin propaganda, it's like Soviet is Russian. It's repeated by Ukrainian Institute of National Memorial. So that's why it's impossible to finish. So decommunization, it's a very dangerous idea, because it's easy to start, but it's impossible to finish, because if you start to find all traces of Sovietness, it's so deeply rooted in our identity. So we started with the Lenin monuments, and then soldiers' monuments, then we decommunized Salat Olivier and Sochnik, and then we will decommunize our I don't know, family photo albums or some family traditions, because they were established in Soviet time. So when it would be possible to stop and say this, okay, it's enough.
It's not a matter of what we are removing, it's a matter of the method. So if we are repeating the Soviet method of vandalizing, removing, smashing, breaking, and all this, and misusing, it's exactly, we are then the followers of the Soviet violation of humans. And maybe it's the point which we have to keep in mind when we are dealing with whatever we are dealing with, that we don't need to become these perpetrators. That's it. And it's very, very hard in the war. But
how else can you dismantle landings? How else can you dismantle landings?
Just dismantle them.
Yeah, but you can break it, then you get some satisfaction from it. So
No. Yeah, but okay, it's really a discussion which is beyond. But I mean the methods for your generation, it's a satisfaction to break, and for old lady, maybe it's better to, I don't know, to do it very, very slow. So it's anyway, something will be violated, of course.
I'm collecting two last commentaries.
It's a very quick commentary and also lateral point of view, because I come from Italy, northeast of Italy. I know, and I'm here because I love to be European, and this is the best place to be with you. And about what you said, Katia, about thinking different. I mean, I was incredibly inspired by the story of the origami deer. irony. This is thinking different. It's a long march that now is approaching Venice. Venice is a city full of irony. The young Venetians have a history of ironic approach to everything since centuries and generations. Connect with them, because never forget, the Russian pavilion is very close to the main entrance in Giardini von Biennale. That's it, so we know the place. And if you connect with the right people there, you can organize something colorful and fantastic. So I would say some actions matter. And if you do something not violent, not destructive, but different there, it will matter. In Italy, you can do whatever you like. You know that we are very lightweight with the police and all the rest. So think different, but this is a fantastic story for journalism everywhere, for people like me. This is an incredible long march of an incredible strong story that can also be ironic despite the tragedies that you have endured. I bow in front of you.
Yeah, regarding irony, I imagine it's hard when you're hurt. Then to have the power to actually think in terms of irony, but that's when you actually have a victory, because you don't use the same means as those who did the perpetration to you. But I wanted to say also that I think working on history never ends. There is no stop. It will always be a process that, looking back, is also looking forward somehow. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just would like to add, I'm just realized that this agreement about the protection of monuments with Russia and Germany, it's also the security guarantees for monuments somehow.
Ksenia, would you like to add? This is...
Maybe one last fun example that was about renaming streets in Berlin that had actually names, or there was also a metro station, Mohrenstraße, that have either a colonial context or something like from before Nazi times, because obviously with the Nazi times we kind of got sorted more or less. But what's before, like Kaiser, Bismarck, whatever. So Mohrenstraße should be renamed, and then some people went there and just took two, that's on it, Möhrenstraße. They made Möhrenstraße. I would have loved to have Möhrenstraße because that is actually the irony of it, that you have the old thing, but make fun of it. And that I would have loved. But I think also the new name, I don't know what it is now exactly what's the new name, but it's also, huh? Yeah, that's also probably something, a very good choice, but first, Möhrenstraße just caught me.
I thank you very much for this very interesting talk discussion.